Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Unlearn with Bianca. Today, we are going to be exploring neuroplasticity, the science of brain change. It has to be one of my most favorite things to talk about. But before we get into it, I have a little favor to ask my loyal followers. One of my goals this year is to really grow the podcast, get some more great conversations happening, pour more energy into it. As you can imagine though, keeping it going week to week, putting out consistent episodes, it takes a lot of time and energy. And a lot of people don't actually realize that yes, I plan the episodes, I'm the host, I record the episodes myself. I also edit every single episode, which takes me hours, and I invest in all the platforms and pay for all of them to keep it running. So I've been thinking about ways in making this more sustainable because I love podcasting. In fact, I would say it's the favorite part of my business at the moment. And I want to continue it. I want to keep getting the episodes out there. So how you could help me, if you enjoy these episodes and you're getting a lot from Unlearn with Bianca and you want to support me, I have just signed up to this platform called Buy Me a Coffee, and it's a donation-based platform to support creatives, podcasters, YouTubers, that kind of thing. So the idea is you can go in and donate as little as a coffee or little or as much as you'd like, anonymously or not. And that just goes towards the creator getting their work out there. Every little contribution would help cover the cost of subscriptions, keep the podcast fresh, keep the content coming for you guys, keep it evolving. And if there's one thing that business has taught me that I've really needed to get past is doing it all myself and not asking for support. So I've been humbled many times. And here I am asking if you could support me in this way, if you have the opportunity to do so. That would mean so much to me. Thank you guys for continuing to listen. And if you can't do anything in this area, then rating the podcast, sharing the podcast, more than enough. I'll leave a direct link in the show notes and you can go and check it out. Okay, let's get into today's episode. We are talking about neuroplasticity. Reason why I wanted to do an episode dedicated to neuroplasticity, which I will explain what it actually is in a minute, I have become aware that I dropped the term brain retraining in many of my episodes. You know, I'm talking about retraining the brain, retraining neural pathways. And essentially, when I'm talking about this, I'm referring to people getting change through this concept called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity, to break it down really simply, it's the brain's ability to change based on how it's being used. So I talk about brain change and I talk about health, and hopefully by now some of you are starting to piece together that the way we use our brain has a huge impact on our health, and that is based on the science of psychoneuroimmunology, which is the way we think, the habits we practice, the emotional patterns we run that can change our brain pathways and then impact our immune system, our nervous system, and our overall health. So there's that connection there. However, if you're still with me, neuroplasticity isn't just important when it comes to our health. It is something that is happening for all of us all the time. We are often unaware where we're directing it though. So it's essentially what's going on when we are changing habits, when we are getting stuck. That is neuroplasticity in action. So today I actually want to talk about it more generally, why it's actually important for all of us to know about and to understand. So where do I want to start? If we go back many decades, up until I would say about 50 years ago, scientists believed that our brains were fixed, that once we reached a certain age, our neurons stopped changing. Our brain pathways were not able to be changed. Habits, personality traits, even our intelligence, scientists thought that was all set in stone. But we know now this is not the truth. We now know that the brain is, I like to say, like plastic. It's changeable, it's malleable. That is through neuroplasticity. And we can strengthen certain neural pathways, make other pathways redundant, which is pretty cool. We can change our brain's circuitry to make it work for us. Now, there is a little bit of truth to this idea that the older we get, the harder it is to change. It's not fully correct. When we're children, the brain is extremely plastic, so very malleable. This is why children can pick up languages really quickly. They can pick up motor coordination, different skills really quickly. And then they go through this thing called synaptic pruning, where they lose certain pathways that aren't used. And then as we get into adulthood, our plasticity slows down a little bit. Forming new neural connections takes a bit longer, and old patterns can be a bit more ingrained. When we are even older, the brain is still able to be rewired, but it often requires more consistency and a bit more intention to create that lasting change. So I want to reiterate, the brain can be changed at any age. It's just that sometimes it requires a little bit more effort. The older we are, the more ingrained patterns can be. So I mentioned this idea before that neuroplasticity is always on and it's always happening. And that just means the brain's always changing. It's always adapting based on how we're using it, based on whether we're actually directing it consciously. So we can be wiring in habits and thought processes that are either positive for us or they're not useful for us. If we have intention behind creating a habit, usually it's going to have a positive result. Otherwise, as I've said before, our brain tends to take on autopilot. It tends to do things that it considers safe, tends to go down usually negativity first, and it can get us quite stuck as well. And that is because the brain is an energy-saving machine. This was quite interesting to me. It consumes a lot of our body's energy, around 20%. So it's constantly looking for ways to minimize effort. And one of the ways it does this is by creating shortcuts or neural shortcuts, neural pathways that allow it to do things automatically. And this is essentially, in our reality, it is habits, it's patterns, it's our default mode. So when something is predictable, your brain doesn't need to go into the heavy lifting. It can just autopilot through it. And this is why we often find ourselves reacting the same way in certain situations, doing the same habits, even though we know we want to change. It's safe, it's efficient, and it's low effort. It doesn't wire in everything equally. Our brain's really asking the question, is this important for survival? That is why it can be quite easy to wire in without realizing negative thought loops, replaying mistakes, overreacting to like the modern day challenges, work email, social media, all of that. It can be easy to do that because the brain is perceiving it as a threat. And the positive thing is neuroplasticity allows us to retrain that bias. Something that I always love to tell my clients, we can literally over time, with practice and consistency, reshape the structure and the wiring of the brain. These changes are gradual, but they're actually measurable, and neuroscience shows us using MRI scans and other imaging techniques, we can actually see real brain changes. Now, I want to give you a metaphor, analogy of how neuroplasticity works in action. Imagine your brain is a garden with many different paths. Let's say you've walked one path every single day for years and years and years. So that is a well worn out path. Like there's a clear track on that path. That could represent your old habits, your old beliefs. This path, it's wide, it's easy to walk down. And that is why those thoughts and those old behaviors, those habits become automatic because you've just walked down that path so many times. Now imagine that you decide, hey, I'm going to go down a different path. I'm going to try something new today. And you start walking down a new garden path. This kind of represents the new thought, the new habit or new pattern. At first, if we think about the path, it is going to be narrow. It's probably going to have some weeds. It's going to be overgrown. It's going to be like a bit awkward to navigate. You're going to have to whack your way through. It's taking conscious effort and energy to get through that path every step, right? It takes a bit more energy, takes a bit more time. But the thing is, the more you walk down this path, the more worn it becomes, the easier it becomes to use, and eventually it just becomes your main route. You've done it so many times. You already know how it goes. You can just walk down that path easy. It's become clear and you can just get down it really quickly. And that other path, that initial path you were walking down, because you haven't used that one in a while, now that one will have weeds and will be overgrown and it will be hard to access. Our brain works in the exact same way. If we are going down a new pathway consistently, the other pathway, the old dominant pathway, after a while, that becomes redundant. It becomes harder to go down, harder to access. What happens over time is the new pathway becomes myelinated. Myelination is a process that happens. It's kind of like the insulation of a wire, right? And when a path is myelinated, a neural path is myelinated, it increases the speed of the electrical signals along the pathway and it makes the connection a lot more reliable. That is why these connections, these pathways get triggered faster and they're easier. So repetitive practice of a pathway strengthens it and unused pathways get weakened. That is neuroplasticity in action. And if we think about it day to day, there are so many examples of you having learned something that over time has just become a dominant pathway that it is so automatic. I think about, and I often tell my clients this example, I think about learning to drive. At the start, I'll be honest, I was not a good driver. I actually took offense paddling out in my day. I struggled with it. I used to blame it on the fact I was left-handed, that, I couldn't quite get, my coordination wasn't happening. But after a while, once I'd gone around the block a few times, once I got the hang of it, I was off doing the main roads. To the point where I think most people have had this experience of highway hypnosis, arrived at a destination, and then, you're thinking about the drive there and you're like, oh, I don't really remember. I don't remember how the drive was. That is the autopilot pathway taking over. You've literally gone down that pathway so many times, the brain's made that such a strong pathway that it becomes very automatic to a dangerous level at that point. Another really good example is learning a language. If you were really young, you probably learned it really easily. And even if you haven't practiced it in a few years, you'll notice that muscle memory is there. I learned French in high school and I remember, stopping after high school. But when I went to France about 5 years later, there were still some words. There were still some words that came to me. I wasn't fluent, that's for sure, but it was those old pathways getting activated again. So neuroplasticity is always happening. We're always learning. The brain is always changing. So the question I want you to ask yourself and I want you to think about is, how can I intentionally direct this neuroplasticity in action towards something that's actually going to enhance my life? Because once you understand how it works and you understand it's a process and it takes some time, it doesn't happen overnight, then you can be more intentional towards it. So life-enhancing things might be like the way in which you respond and react to stresses in your life. It could be learning another new skill that you've been wanting to pick up, changing your routines, talking to yourself more positively, strengthening circuits around empathy. There's a whole lot of things that we can really work on. So to strengthen neural pathways, there are a few things that need to happen. The first thing is we need to break the circuit. Then we need to change the input. What is getting inputted into the brain? Then we need to create an experience, ideally an emotional experience, and then we repeat. So breaking the circuit, changing the input, repeat over and over again. That is what changes the brain. I love this idea of circuit breaking because that's essentially what it is. You're breaking one path and going down a whole new path. For those of you who are new to this podcast, one of my areas of expertise is being a brain retraining coach. And I wanted to share some of the elements that come into these brain retraining tools with you guys so you can start to think about how this actually works at a practical level. When I'm working with my clients, I teach them a set of very intentional mental rehearsal tools that take a couple of minutes. These rehearsal tools are all based on coaching, on changing language, interrupting a predictable habit with movement and breath. And at the end, there's some visualization. Even just thinking about some of these elements can be really useful, because 5 to 10 minutes of attention practices has been proven to make your brain a lot more flexible and to get pathways firing in a new direction. Let's say it's like a client of mine that would want to get up early and go to the gym, but currently they find themselves snoozing their alarm. The first thing I would start on is helping them understand some wiring that's currently there at an identity level. So I would actually pose the questions like, what's happening in your life currently that you don't want? Another thing I may get them to consider is who or what might have planted that pattern in you. Where may have that come from? Because sometimes people get handed down things such as, oh, you're just lazy, or there's different beliefs that we can take on over time that internally over time you start to believe, oh, I'm just not someone that's fit, or I'm not strong. So these are identity beliefs that we want to start challenging. It could just be that this person's gotten into a lot of just bad habits, and then over time that's become automatic. But looking at the identity and the beliefs are really important. I would likely get this person to think about is, how do things roll out when this all happens? So what are you usually thinking and feeling and doing when you miss or snooze through your alarm? And then what does that lead into? Could be feelings of guilt, frustration, and then repeating that every day. So that becomes more embedded as well. Look at the current wiring that's there. It's also really important that this person comes with a goal that is not focused on, I don't want to be lazy, because that's what their brain will have been focusing on for a long period of time. So it's like, I want to become a fit person. I want to have vitality. I want to be up and about for my kids. They need to have a goal and actually focused on what they want rather than what they don't want. Essentially taking you guys through like where I'd go with a client, right? Now, when it comes to actually breaking circuits and breaking neurology in the moment, we would identify where the circuit needs breaking. And I would say the first point we can work on is snoozing through the alarm, right? As soon as this alarm goes off, I would get the person to do something different. That would include getting up and doing movement, which I teach intentionally with the lightning process. They would be doing a quick breath exercise, and then they would be looking at their choices. Okay, so you'd actually be looking, I could do this, I could lie in bed as I have every other time and wire this in, or I could do something new. Then there's this part of retraining the brain, which I think is really important, looking at how you're talking to yourself about a situation, because remember, that is activating the same pathways. If we're beating ourselves up, if we're complaining, that pathway is going to get stronger. So I teach this person how to do something called distant self-talk. They're coaching themselves. When we're doing self-talk from a distance, it's a lot easier to connect to because it pulls you out of emotional overwhelm. It actually activates the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that's responsible for perspective, for problem solving, and for accessing that state of calm. There would be reminders of why this person is making a new choice, what is on the other side for them, a lot of reassurance. And after that, I would teach them how to do some visualization. Visualizing themselves literally going to the door, getting their clothes on, going to the gym, even seeing themselves coming back from the gym with that post-workout glow. They may even see themselves talking to someone at work saying, yeah, I got up and went to the gym today and it felt amazing, that endorphin boost. So they're starting to connect with that person slightly ahead, like a few hours ahead of where they're currently at. And the more you repeat that and you start to visualize who you're becoming, the more you're activating a whole new neural pathway. Tongue twister there. Break the circuit and redirect the pathway. Usually you'd be in bed, snoozing, missing the alarm, feeling guilt, feeling frustration, and repeating that whole thing again. Whereas if you've got a circuit breaker, you can change that predictable response and over time wire in something new. The reason why visualization is key in my books to really utilizing neuroplasticity is because it creates emotion. If you can get in touch with that version of you who's already got the desired result, you're feeling really good. And emotion increases arousal, it increases memory consolidation, and it helps with that neural firing. So that is why emotion can really enhance brain change. It doesn't have to be complex. It's really just choosing to show up differently consistently. If you're someone who used to struggle with people pleasing, but over a certain amount of time, you've really learned step by step to create boundaries, to speak your needs, to say no, over time, it's not going to feel as hard to set boundaries, right? You're going to look back and be like, oh, I really used to struggle with that, but now it just feels like it's a lot easier. That is neuroplasticity. So it's happening in so many areas of our life. It's just that we can speed it up a little bit with some extra mental rehearsing techniques. The reason why some people like to learn specific brain retraining tools is because they've got a method that they can go to consistently, that go-to thing that they can rely on. It takes the energy out of like, what do I do? How do I do this? They get their support in that way. You can also start to utilize neuroplasticity simply through novelty and challenge. The brain thrives on novelty, engaging in new experiences. Like I saw this post, I actually put it on Instagram last night, on how travel is a really good way to encode new pathways and new nervous system states, because your brain actually can't rely on old scripts. Learning new skills, even socializing in new areas, doing a hobby that you've never picked up before. This really encourages the formation of new neural networks. Changing the route of your drive or your walk, doing a new class, anything to get you out of your normal routine, it is healthy and it's so good for your brain. So even if you're not working on a specific thing at the moment, don't forget to just do new things, have new experiences, because it's really, really good for you. And there's just a few more points that I want to cover before we round out. One thing is our environment. So how can you change your environment to support change? There's small things we can do in our environment to really support brain change. So for that person that wanted to go to the gym and get up and have that routine, if they built in a layer of community, if they put music on in the morning before they went, which is an environmental cue, having a reward at the gym experience, so it could be like get a coffee at that place after I finished in that environment, they are wiring in and associating the gym with being rewarding. It gives the gym a different emotional tag. It's about how do we break the circuits. If we go back to the gym example, you could put your phone outside the room or on the other side of the room, so you actually have to get up and you're not going to get that instant relief. You'd actually have an opportunity to circuit break before you get to that relief. You could quickly turn the light on. That would again break the circuit. We can remove that instant reward loop by changing up our environment. Speaking of exercise, physical activity is actually one of the most powerful ways to maintain that neuroplasticity. Movement actually increases this thing called BDNF, and BDNF is really important because it helps strengthen synaptic connections. Any form of movement really helps the process of neuroplasticity. Sleep also helps. We know that it's important. The brain consolidates new learning and new memory. And our diet is also really important to support neuroplasticity in the right direction. Omega-3 fatty acids, proteins, and they provide building blocks that neurons need to form new connections. So if you think about fatty foods, brain foods, salmon, egg yolk, avocado, nuts, almonds, they all really help improve cognitive functioning and processing. I've also heard a lot of really good things about creatine as well for our brain health, but I'll have to look into this more, especially for women. I've heard a lot of research lately. So these are also things that you can just keep in mind as you are starting to learn new things, as you're starting to practice new habits, really support the wiring process. And the last thing I really want to hone in on, when neuroplasticity is in action, you are literally strengthening whole new neural pathways, okay? We know habits to change can feel hard sometimes. Change can feel uncomfortable for a reason. You can expect the brain to resist because it's using more energy. It requires that conscious effort. Circuit breaking disrupts the usual prediction. So I want to reassure you that if you're creating new habits, new ways of being, discomfort isn't a sign that things are wrong, okay? It's actually a sign that you're building new circuitry. You're building new wiring. Like, that is impressive. It's not an easy feat. And I say this because sometimes people think that, oh, it's going to happen within like a week. Remember, habits typically, they can take, I would say on average, 6 weeks is a good amount of time to really embed a new habit. Yes, small changes can happen within 2 to 6 weeks. And that could be like practicing a new thought, a new mental habit. That's when old neural pathways really start to weaken and you can notice that other ones are getting a bit easier to access. Bigger shifts, more behavioral shifts, I would say they take a bit longer. So 6 to 10 weeks, 6 to 12 weeks. I would say 6 to 10 weeks is often where I see my clients have like the best change because they've been doing something, for months at that point where things become really embedded. And then for really identity shifts and major overhauls, that can take months. And I say this honestly because it's all very normal. So remember, if you're overcoming some really deeply ingrained beliefs or emotional patterns that you've had for a long time, stick at it because it does take some time. Persistence is really important, and there's always support there. People like me can support you do that. But remember, there's nothing wrong with you if your brain wants to divert to old patterns, old pathways, old habits. It's all about consistency. Neural pathways need consistent activation for long-term strengthening, for old pathways to weaken and become redundant. Consistency. It beats intensity every time. Our neuroplasticity, it thrives on the daily reps. It thrives on the constant reinforcement. It thrives on looking back and really identifying the small wins, those repeated micro experiences. Rewiring doesn't happen in massive breakthroughs. It doesn't happen in one huge decision. It's all the little wins. Now, I want to leave you with one more thing to think about, which I always tell my clients. So I'm going to tell you guys, if your brain can wire into a habit that's not useful for you, maybe it's just happened over time without realizing it, you've got a really strong pathway for stress or a really strong pathway for reacting. Do not underestimate your ability to wire out of that. Because if you're an expert enough to get it that strong, that pathway that's no longer serving you, then you absolutely are able to rewire that, put all of that energy into creating a new pathway that works for you, that is beneficial for you. The people I see, the people that often get stuck the most and that do really well at brain retraining, they are intelligent people. They've become really stuck, but they're getting stuck at an expert level. When they understand how to get unstuck, they can put all of their energy into getting what they want and things shift. So I love this idea that if you can accidentally become an expert at something that's not serving you, you can totally become an expert at something that is serving you through consistency and showing up over time. I hope you guys have taken something from today's episode. Please do send through questions. If you need anything explained in more detail, I'd love to help. I'll put the link to buy me a coffee below, so please check that out if you're drawn to doing that. Thank you all again for being here, taking the time out of your precious week to tune in with me, and I'll see you guys next time.